The summer sun blazed down on Maple Street, turning the pavement warm beneath the soles of passing shoes. At the corner, barely noticeable to most pedestrians, stood a tiny lemonade stand. Its bright yellow sign fluttered gently in the breeze, handwritten in large, uneven letters, Lemonade 5010. The little girl behind it, maybe 7 or 8, had sticky fingers from squeezing lemons all morning. Her hair was tied in 2 messy pigtails, and her dress, though cheerful and yellow, was slightly worn. But her eyes told a story far bigger than her small-framed determination. She arranged her cups meticulously, trying to make each row perfect. She had spent hours preparing this stand, hoping that today might finally be the day she could raise enough money for something incredibly important. Her little brother, just 4 years old, had been sick for weeks. There was a special medicine he needed, and their family could barely afford it. Every coin she collected brought her a step closer to helping him. Cars rushed past, drivers barely glancing at her small stand. Pedestrians avoided eye contact, some distracted by their phones, others in too much of a hurry to notice. Even kids her age walked by without sparing a glance. Despite all this, she stood tall, her tiny hands clutching the cup of lemonade she had just poured, and whispered a quiet prayer that someone kind would come. Then, out of nowhere, he appeared. Not just anyone, a figure whose reputation preceded him wherever he went. Calm, composed, with an aura of strength that seemed almost larger than life. Chuck Norris. He walked slowly down the sidewalk, observing the world with his sharp, steady gaze. And then he noticed her. The little girl's eyes widened. She froze for a moment, unsure if her mind was playing tricks. But no, it was real. The legendary Chuck Norris was standing just a few feet away, looking directly at her lemonade stand. He smiled, a soft, genuine smile, and knelt slightly to meet her gaze. "Hello there," he said, his voice deep and calm, carrying the warmth of someone who had seen much in life, and yet remained unshaken. "Looks like someone's working hard today." Her small hands trembled as she held out a cup. It's only 50 cents. She stammered, trying to sound confident. "I'm saving money for my little brother's medicine." The words hit Chuck like a quiet punch, stronger than any fight he'd ever faced. A small child standing alone, shouldering so much responsibility, and still managing a smile. His eyes softened. In that single moment, the world around them seemed to pause. The rushing cars, the indifferent pedestrians, the summer heat, nothing else mattered. A few hours earlier, the day had begun quietly on Maple Street. Emma, the little girl behind the lemonade stand, had arrived before sunrise, her small arms carrying a wooden table and a crate of lemons. She had spent the early morning arranging her stand, carefully placing each cup of lemonade in neat rows, polishing them with the edge of her sleeve. The bright yellow sign she had painted herself wavered gently in the morning breeze, the letters uneven but heartfelt. Lemonade, 50. Her mother had suggested the stand as a fun way to pass the summer days, but for Emma it was more than fun. It was a mission. Her little brother, Tommy, had been sick for weeks. Doctors said a particular medicine could help him, but it was expensive, far beyond what their family could afford right now. Emma had decided that she could try to raise the money herself. Every coin, every dollar counted. Every person who bought a cup of lemonade was a step closer to helping her brother feel better. The street around her was alive with activity, but not the kind she hoped for. Cars sped past, drivers focused on their phones, conversations, and the day ahead. Pedestrians walked by, some casting a fleeting glance at her stand, most oblivious. Even other children her age seemed to ignore her, lost in their own games or their parents' hands. Still, she held her ground. She adjusted the cups, wiped the stickiness from her fingers, and straightened her back. She whispered a small prayer under her breath. "Please, let someone kind notice me today." And then, she did. A tall, composed figure appeared at the edge of the street. There was a presence about him that Emma couldn't quite describe. Strong, calm, yet approachable. Even from a distance, people seemed to notice him, turning their heads slightly as he passed. But it wasn't the fame or recognition that mattered to Emma. It was the way he slowed down, observing her stand with interest. Chuck Norris. The name itself carried weight, but at that moment, Emma didn't need to know the legend. She only felt the warmth in his gaze and the sincerity in his calm stride toward her. Her heart raced, and her hands fumbled slightly as she straightened the sign and picked up a cup of lemonade. Chuck approached slowly, not with urgency, not with spectacle. He simply walked, observing her effort, noticing the small details, the way she had neatly placed a napkin under each cup, the small jar marked, "Tips for Tommy," and the careful care with which she carried the lemonade from table to customer. There was no entourage, no camera crew, no fanfare, just him, walking with purpose and kindness. "Hello there," he said softly as he reached her stand. His deep voice carried across the street, calm but attentive. "Looks like someone's working very hard today." Emma froze, her small hand trembling as she held out the cup. "It's, only 50 cents, she stammered, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm saving money for my little brother's medicine." Chuck's eyes softened. Her words were honest, heavy with responsibility far beyond her years. She had been overlooked by nearly everyone all morning, and yet here was someone who noticed, who truly listened. "Most people walk by without seeing what matters," he said quietly, kneeling slightly to meet her gaze. "But sometimes someone notices, and that's the difference." Emma felt a mixture of awe and nervousness. She had never spoken to anyone like him before, someone who seemed larger than life, yet kind enough to kneel and talk to her as an equal. Her tiny hands shook, but she held the cup steadily. She wanted to say something more, something clever, something that would show she was brave and capable, but the words stuck in her throat. The moment stretched on. Passers-by slowed, some stopping to watch. There was something magnetic about the encounter, something that drew attention without a single dramatic gesture. Chuck's presence alone demanded notice, not through power, but through calm authority. Emma felt encouraged, almost emboldened. The sting of earlier rejections, the ignored pleas, and the fleeting glances of indifference seemed to melt away. For the first time that morning, she felt seen. And then Chuck did something that made her heart skip a beat. He reached into his pocket, a gentle, deliberate gesture that spoke more than words ever could. Before we continue, take a moment in the comments and tell me, have you ever had a stranger's kindness completely change your day? It doesn't have to be big. Sometimes even small gestures have the biggest impact. Emma handed him the cup of lemonade, her tiny fingers brushing against his. Chuck took a slow sip, savoring the simple sweetness, but his eyes didn't leave hers. They were full of curiosity, concern, and a quiet kind of respect. In that moment, he wasn't a celebrity or a legend. He was just a man who saw a little girl, carrying a weight far heavier than her years should allow. "Why is the world being so unfair to someone as brave as you?" he asked softly, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had faced countless challenges yet remained unshaken. Emma shrugged, looking down at her shoes. "I guess people have their own problems. They don't see mine." Her voice was barely audible, but the words cut through the summer air sharper than any shout. At that moment, laughter broke the quiet tension. A group of older kids, maybe 10 or 11, sauntered down the sidewalk, clearly looking for someone to bother. "Why is she selling lemonade?" one sneered. "Pathetic." They began tossing her cups slightly, laughing as some spilled, sugar and juice mixing on the hot pavement. Emma's heart sank. She froze, unsure what to do. The coins she had carefully counted just moments ago were now scattered, some rolling toward the curb. Her dream of helping her brother seemed to be slipping away with each giggle and shove. Chuck Norris stepped forward, not with anger, not with theatrics, but with a presence that made the world pause. The kids noticed him, stopping mid-laugh, unsure how to react. His eyes were calm, steady, and unyielding. Yet there was no threat in his stance, only quiet authority. "Some people don't understand courage," he said, his voice low but firm. "But that's okay. Courage isn't for them to understand. It's for you to live every day." The kids looked at one another, unsure how to respond. They had expected confrontation, maybe a shout, maybe even someone to push them back. But instead they got something far more powerful, silence paired with unwavering calm. The weight of Chuck's gaze made them reconsider, and their laughter faded into awkward shuffles. Emma took a deep breath, encouraged by the unexpected protection and the lesson unfolding before her. She realized that courage wasn't about fighting back with anger or fear. It was about standing tall even when no one believed in you. The older kids lingered for a moment, glancing at the lemonade stand, then at Chuck. One of them muttered, "This isn't funny anymore," and they walked away, leaving her cups upright and her coins untouched. The tension in the air slowly dissipated, replaced by a sense of relief and quiet triumph. Chuck knelt down to her level again, giving her a small, reassuring smile.
"See,"
he said softly. "Even when people try to knock you down, the right kind of courage lifts you higher." Emma's eyes filled with tears, not just from fear or frustration, but from a deep, sudden sense of hope. She had been overlooked all morning, ignored by drivers, pedestrians, and even other kids. But here was someone who noticed, someone who understood, someone who quietly showed her what real strength looked like. Then came a twist that Emma hadn't expected. Chuck reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. Her eyes widened. She didn't understand immediately, but she felt the weight of the moment, the significance of the gesture. Sometimes, he said quietly, help comes in ways you don't expect. Courage opens doors, but kindness walks through them. The camera captured Emma's hands trembling as she reached for the paper. Her heart raced. Every step of the morning, the struggles, the teasing, the ignored pleas, led to this moment. She glanced up at Chuck, her voice barely a whisper. I can't take this. He shook his head gently, kneeling closer. It's not about taking. It's about seeing the difference one small act can make. You've already earned more than you realize. The scene froze for a heartbeat, allowing viewers to absorb the intensity of the moment, the lesson, the courage, and the calm power of someone who leads by example rather than force. Emma's small hands trembled as she reached for the folded piece of paper Chuck had pulled from his jacket pocket. Her heart was pounding, a mix of nervousness and disbelief. She had spent the entire morning hoping someone would notice her effort. But this was beyond anything she had imagined. Chuck looked at her, his expression softening. He didn't tower over her in intimidation. Instead, he knelt to her level, meeting her eyes with genuine warmth. Emma, he said quietly, you've been carrying a lot on your shoulders today. You've shown courage that most adults wouldn't have. Her voice shook as she tried to speak. I just want my brother to get better. I can't do this on my own. Tears welled up in her eyes, and for the first time that day, she allowed herself to feel the weight of everything she had been holding in. Chuck listened silently. There was no rush, no interruption, no condescension, just a patient, understanding presence. It was in this stillness, in the quiet attention of someone who truly cared, that Emma realized the enormity of the moment. She wasn't just seen, she was understood. Then came the twist that made her heart leap. Chuck reached a little further into his pocket and pulled out a folded check. Emma's eyes widened so much it seemed they could fill the street. Her fingers shook uncontrollably as she looked at it. The words on the paper almost too incredible to believe. The check was enough to cover her brother's medicine, not just for 1 month, but for several months. I can't take this, she whispered, her voice breaking. It's too much. Chuck shook his head gently, his calm demeanor unwavering. It's not about taking, Emma. It's about recognizing that courage deserves to be supported. You've earned every bit of this, not because of me, but because of your strength, your heart, and your determination. Emma blinked, tears spilling down her cheeks. The sugar, sticky heat of the summer morning mixed with relief and disbelief. For the first time, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she could help her brother feel better. The street around them began to change subtly. Pedestrians who had earlier ignored her now paused, some pulling out their phones, capturing the moment. Cars slowed as drivers glanced curiously at the small scene unfolding on the sidewalk. Even the older kids who had teased her earlier lingered at a distance, stunned into silence by the quiet authority and generosity of the man standing beside her. Chuck didn't seek attention. He didn't demand applause. He simply watched, giving Emma space to process the impact of what had just happened. It was a lesson in humility, in patience and understanding the quiet power of kindness. You see, Emma, he said softly, real strength isn't measured by how loud or big your actions are. It's measured by the difference you make in someone's life, even when no one else is watching. Emma held the check, looking down at the coins she had collected earlier, and realizing how small acts of courage and kindness could ripple outward in ways she had never imagined. She looked up at Chuck, her voice still trembling but stronger than before. Thank you. Thank you for believing in me. Chuck smiled faintly. No, Emma. Thank you for showing me what courage looks like. Most people walk through life without ever realizing it, but you've reminded me, and everyone here, that bravery can come from the smallest hearts. A gentle breeze swept down the street, carrying the scent of lemons and fresh asphalt. Emma's mother arrived just in time to see her daughter clutching the check, tears of relief streaming down her face. She hugged Emma tightly, whispering words of gratitude and disbelief. I can't believe this, she said, voice shaking. I don't know how to thank him. Chuck gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, and prepared to step away.
Emma called out, Thank you? Thank you so much.
He turned, giving a quiet wave, not for recognition, not for attention, but to honor the courage that had led her here. The world around them felt lighter, as though the air itself had shifted. The atmosphere on Maple Street had shifted. What had begun as a quiet, overlooked corner now buzzed with whispers, curiosity, and a sense of wonder. Emma stood clutching the check in her small hands, still trembling, her eyes wide with disbelief. Around her, people who had previously walked by without a second glance now stopped to watch. Some pulled out their phones, capturing the scene, while others simply stood in awe, sensing the significance of what had just occurred. Neighbors slowly approached. Mrs. Thompson from next door brought a small basket of freshly baked cookies, placing it gently on the edge of the stand. "I saw everything," she said softly. "You've been so brave, Emma. You deserve more than just kindness, you deserve support." Even the kids who had teased her earlier lingered at a distance, their earlier laughter replaced with hesitation and curiosity. They had not expected the quiet authority that Chuck Norris had displayed. His calm demeanor, his measured words, and the way he had allowed courage and patience to speak, louder than threats, left them unsure of how to act. Some muttered apologies, while others simply shuffled away, humbled by the unexpected lesson in strength and humility. Emma's mother finally arrived, breathless from running down the street. She froze, staring at her daughter clutching the check. I can't believe this," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She hugged Emma tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, Emma, you've worked so hard. How can I ever thank him?" Chuck smiled faintly, kneeling slightly so as not to tower over them. "No thanks are necessary," he said softly. "What matters is courage, determination, and the willingness to try. She has all three, and that's more powerful than any money I could offer." Emma's mother shook her head, overwhelmed by the generosity and humility before her. She realized this was more than a lesson for Emma. It was a lesson for everyone present. Courage and kindness ripple outward in ways that cannot be measured, and sometimes, the smallest actions create the biggest impact. Passers-by began to offer help as well. One woman dropped a few coins into Emma's jar for Tommy's medicine. Another offered fresh lemons from her garden. Even a man walking his dog stopped to ask if he could help in any way. Slowly, the street transformed from a place of indifference into a community united by empathy and shared humanity. Chuck observed quietly, not seeking praise or attention. He allowed Emma and those around her to absorb the moment fully. "You see," he said gently, "sometimes the world will seem unfair, even cruel. But small acts of courage and kindness can shift everything. The strength you show quietly, the way you face challenges without complaint, that's what makes a difference." Emma looked at Chuck, still clutching the check, her voice shaking but filled with newfound confidence. I think I understand now. Courage isn't about being the biggest or loudest. It's about doing what you can, even when no one is watching." Chuck nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Exactly. And what you do today will echo far beyond this moment. You've already inspired everyone here, and your bravery will continue to inspire." As he prepared to leave, Emma called out, her voice clear and steady this time.
Thank you. Thank you for everything."
Chuck gave a small wave, turning back toward the sidewalk. The moment was complete, not because of fame, money, or spectacle, but because courage, kindness, and humility had met and created something far greater than any single act could achieve. Before we move to the final resolution, take a moment in the comments. Have you ever witnessed a small act of courage or kindness that completely changed someone's day? Share your story, we'd love to hear it. The street around Emma's lemonade stand had transformed completely. What had started as a quiet corner with little attention had turned into a scene of warmth, respect, and support. Neighbors chatted quietly, sharing coins, cookies, and even extra lemons for her stand. The air buzzed not with the chaos of passing cars or the rush of indifferent pedestrians, but with the gentle hum of a community moved by courage and kindness. Emma clutched the check in her small hands, still trembling, but her eyes shone with relief and newfound hope. Her mother stood beside her, hugging her tightly, whispering words of gratitude and awe. "I can't believe this," she said softly, tears streaking her cheeks. "You've worked so hard, Emma, and now, thanks to him, Tommy's medicine is taken care of." Chuck Norris stepped back slightly, observing the scene with quiet satisfaction. He didn't need recognition, didn't need applause. His goal had never been about heroics or attention. It was about acknowledging courage when it appeared in its purest form. He knelt slightly to Emma's level again. "Emma," he said, his voice calm but full of strength, "today you've done something remarkable. You've shown courage, perseverance, and a heart bigger than most adults I know. Remember that? These are the traits that shape a life. Emma's voice was soft but steady. I just wanted to help my brother. I didn't know it would. She trailed off, looking at the check, the coins, the neighbors who had now joined in support, and then at Chuck. I didn't know it would mean so much. Chuck gave a faint smile. That's the thing about courage. It rarely realizes the impact it has immediately. But the world notices, often in ways you can't imagine. And the kindness you receive, when it comes, is not just for you. It's a reflection of the strength you've already shown. Emma's mother finally spoke, looking at Chuck with a mixture of awe and gratitude. Thank you. Truly, how can I ever repay this? Chuck shook his head. No repayment is needed. The best thanks is continuing to show courage and kindness, not just for your brother, but for others. That's how the ripple grows. Emma looked up at him, her voice brimming with determination. I will. I promise I'll do my best. A quiet moment passed, filled with the soft sounds of the neighborhood, the distant bark of a dog, the rustling of leaves, the faint hum of passing cars, but none of it felt intrusive. For the first time that morning, Emma felt that her small efforts mattered, that the bravery she carried inside her tiny frame had been recognized, that the smallest acts could lead to the largest impact. Then Chuck took a final step back, ready to leave, but before he did, he knelt once more and looked directly into her eyes. Emma, remember this moment. Not for me, but for yourself. Courage isn't something you get from others. It's something you show, and it changes the world quietly but powerfully. You've already begun changing yours. Emma's mother reached out, placing her hand over her daughter's. You've taught her more than you know, she said softly. Emma looked at Chuck one last time and smiled. Thank you for believing in me. Chuck gave a final nod, his expression calm, almost imperceptibly proud. Then he began walking down the sidewalk, leaving behind a trail of inspiration far stronger than any words or gestures could convey. His presence lingered in the hearts of those who had witnessed the encounter, not as a spectacle, but as a lesson in humility, strength, and quiet leadership. The street slowly returned to normal, but something fundamental had changed. Emma's lemonade stand was no longer just a small corner of Maple Street. It had become a symbol of courage, resilience, and the profound impact one brave child could have on an entire community. The sun began its slow descent, casting long golden rays over Maple Street. Emma's lemonade stand, once quiet and overlooked, now glowed under the warmth of an afternoon light that seemed to mirror the hope in her heart. She cleaned up a few scattered cups, arranging the remaining lemonade carefully on the table. But the energy around her stand had changed. The street that had earlier ignored her was now alive with attention, kindness, and admiration. Emma's mother watched her closely, still overwhelmed by the morning's events. She realized that today wasn't just about raising money. It was a lesson in courage, perseverance, and the ripple effects of small acts of bravery. The world had finally noticed her daughter, but it wasn't only because of Chuck Norris' presence. It was because Emma had stood tall, worked hard, and refused to give up, even when no one believed in her. Chuck Norris had already started walking down the sidewalk, blending into the ordinary rhythm of the street, but the impact of his presence remained. His visit had not been about showmanship or spectacle. It had been about acknowledging courage where it was due, giving hope to someone who had already demonstrated more bravery than most adults could ever imagine. He had modeled humility, patience, and genuine kindness, all without a word of fanfare. Emma looked down at the check once more, realizing the responsibility it represented. But she also understood something more profound. True strength is quiet. It isn't about being the loudest or the strongest in the room. True strength is measured by resilience, empathy, and the willingness to act with compassion. In a world that often seems indifferent, these qualities are rare and precious. The street around her hummed softly as neighbors returned to their routines, but the memory of today lingered. Mrs. Thompson left a small note with cookies. Your courage is a lesson for us all. The older kids who had teased her earlier stayed at a distance, exchanging whispers and glances, perhaps beginning to understand that mocking others accomplishes nothing. The scene had quietly transformed, leaving a lasting impression on everyone who witnessed it. Emma knelt to wipe the table, glancing at her jar of coins and the stack of lemonade cups. She thought of Tommy, imagining him smiling when she brought him the medicine. Her heart swelled with pride, not for what Chuck had done, but for what she had achieved. Courage, she realized, doesn't demand recognition. It quietly shapes the world around you, often in ways you don't immediately see. Chuck's final words echoed in her mind. Courage isn't something you get from others. It's something you show, and it changes the world quietly but powerfully. Emma understood now. Every small act of bravery, every moment of perseverance, and every kind gesture could ripple outward, touching lives far beyond her own. Today had proven that. Before stepping back to pack up, Emma smiled at the passers-by, who lingered just a moment longer than usual. She realized that she had become a quiet example of courage in her own neighborhood. Her lemonade stand wasn't just about raising money anymore. It was a symbol of hope, resilience, and the extraordinary impact of ordinary people who refused to give up. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over Maple Street, a single thought lingered in Emma's mind. Respect isn't just for the famous or the wealthy. True respect, true kindness, and true courage are shown in the quiet moments, often when no one is watching. Type Koyuraji in the comments if you believe small acts can create big change. And share where you're watching from. We want to celebrate everyday heroes like you.